All right, folks. To get started, thanks for showing up. Classroom 1, the text channel in Discord, I dropped a bunch of resource links. So if you have to duck out early, or maybe maybe something comes up, you can go back and look at some of the content. Maybe it'll jar your memory. But really, what we're going to be talking about in the first part of this is your resources. I want to kind of clear the air for what exactly this feature is, and kind of start from there, or what it isn't. So first and foremost, this this new feature is kind of been a long time coming. I've seen some pushback from the community. How come we're not working on more important things than this? Well, this is actually something that was part of the original Kickstarter. If you were a part of that, one of the things they wanted to do was provide an audio solution for Fantasy Grounds, which was a long-range project for them. So it's finally come to fruition. This could have probably actually been done last year. However, they were held up by licensing agreements. So you had to get together with everyone, including Wizards of the Coast, with to be on board with it. So that was the big holdup. They had to get signatures, they had to get agreements, they had to get all kinds of permissions and stuff like that to be able to provide this through Fantasy Grounds. I don't know what the big hoopla is, but apparently if they license through Syrinscape, they cannot sub-license out all the other rule set stuff. Fortunately, most of those rule sets Fantasy Grounds already has a relationship with, so it probably wasn't too bad. But anyway, so this sound thing is something that the community did want at one point, and it looks like it's fairly popular. I mean, this is the first event in quite some time where I've had like 40 people sign up. I don't expect 40, but that's a pretty good turnout. The other thing about this is that we don't know everything there is to know about this yet because it's pretty new, right? There's not a lot of documentation out there, and the only documentation I found is scattered throughout the forums, through videos, through websites. I mean, it's everywhere, right? So when it first came out, it was pretty confusing because the instructions weren't even updated at that point. So when Doug released the release video, I kind of wish they'd had some of that stuff done, but that's just my personal opinion. But we do now have an updated wiki guide, which was just recently, I think last weekend. Derek knocked this out for the community. So one of the things I wanted to explain was this prerequisite stuff. Most of you here probably already know this, but I'm going to restate this. And the reason I'm telling you this again is because I want you to spread this out. Like once you understand this stuff, you get your head wrapped around it, start spreading the word, because it really does help. Kind of, there's people out there buying this stuff that don't really know what it does, which is not uncommon, but that is something that's happening. I've seen people buying the sound packs, but they don't realize that it doesn't contain any sounds, and it does go to a specific rule set with specific books. And if you go to the website where they actually have these, I mean, these are the sounds. These are the 3 that they offer. Now, there's obviously going to be more in the future. These are just the 3 initial ones. Again, I wish they kind of would have had a couple more of these done, like for Pathfinder and other stuff. But nonetheless, this is what we have. And nowhere on here does it say you need Syrinscape subscription. However, it does say Syrinscape. And if you click on the product itself, it says that in 4 places. So, there's people that have gone out and bought these and turn around and they have to give them back because they don't realize that they have to have a subscription to the Supersyrin account, which is on the Syrinscape itself. So that's like $10 a month. So once people see that, they're like, "Oh, I don't want this shit. I'm done with it." So they just refund it, and that's it. So they charge you every couple months on this thing. So it's $10 a month, but when you get charged, they do it every other month. So you get charged $20 every 2 months. And what about the Syrinscape as opposed to people who already have this stuff is that if you don't have the Supersyrin sub, you're not going to be able to take advantage of some of the audio links that are created in those sound packs, the links. So that's part of it. And the other thing is there's some people that have the web player, the older one that was hosted on your computer. That one doesn't really work with this integration without, rerouting the audio and, setting up your own link. So it really doesn't benefit people who've already got solutions going for Fantasy Grounds and their tables. So if you already have like Matacure's sound links and you already have everything set up, I don't think you really need to mess with this too much. And this is his opinion. You can totally just drop all that stuff and start over and do the integration stuff. But really, it's not a whole lot different because you still have to figure out a way to pipe the audio to Discord. If you're going to use third-party content and like that player, the online, or not the online player, but the localized player, the older one from Syrinscape, or any other thing like that, you do have to figure out how to get the audio from your computer to your players, or they're not going to hear anything. And that's one of the things I believe that people are pissed about because they thought that this audio integration was going to, be the holy grail of getting audio to your players. It's not. It's just a tool that allows you to link to audio links within a given platform. In this case, it would be Syrinscape, or if you have them hosted on your local computer. That's really the main pain points, is that there are some people who don't understand how it works. They think that the sounds are part of the packs themselves, or not. And they also believe that, everything is going to be set up and you don't have to do anything. That's not really the case. There's a little bit of setup involved, whether you do the Syrinscape method or you do your own local audio. So local audio is a little bit more complicated to set up because you're still facing the fact that you have to send that to your players. And there are lots of solutions for that. We'll talk about that a little bit towards the end, but it's not really a requirement for Fantasy Grounds to provide that. That's up to us or the end user on how we're going to incorporate that with our setup, because there's so many different things. You got different operating systems, different computers. It's a whole thing about computing more than Fantasy Grounds at that point. So we're going to backtrack to the setup part. I don't know if you guys already have, it's hard to teach a class when you don't really have an idea of where everyone is on this, but we're talking about the prerequisites. And one of them is that you have to pipe your audio if you don't use the online player that Syrinscape provides if you have a sub there. And the other thing is that, the sounds are not inside the audio packs themselves. They're just links. And then on top of that, you still have things where you're using bandwidth to stream audio too. So if you're already having challenges on your computer with Fantasy Grounds and such, you are creating another form of bandwidth that has to be pushed to your players or Discord. So there's all kinds of little technical things that pop up when you guys are trying to do this, especially, if it's a homebrew thing, there's a lot of setup there. Generally speaking, this thing goes right into the sound folder, which is something that doesn't already exist if you're going to use your own audio in the background. So this is something that you'll have to set up manually if you have a large collection of MP3s or files on your machine that you want to use. And then again, you still have to set up the audio to go to your players. So what they're showing us here is that all audio that you want to use within Fantasy Grounds, that's like part of your computer, that's not necessarily Syrinscape, but it's for the platform itself, and for like MP3s, WAV files, whatever you have. You have to set up a folder in Fantasy Grounds, and they recommend that the folder has to be in Fantasy Grounds directory. So I'm going to actually drop out of this. Sometimes the pictures don't really compute unless you see the actual. So up here on the top left, there's a way that you can access the back end of Fantasy Grounds. And if you open this up, I had to create a folder called Sounds. So this is where all of your audio should go before you start doing anything else. And then you still have to do the audio piping too. So once you've done that, then you can put all your sounds in this folder, and anything that you want to import into Fantasy Grounds, you have to copy the link path and put it in Fantasy Grounds. So there's a little bit of work there that some people aren't willing to do, because it is kind of convoluted. Like, you're trying to figure out how to pipe your audio, then you're figuring out what directories and how that stuff is, and then you're making your own links on top of that. So there is quite a bit to digest with local audio because it's something that people want to do, but they don't want to necessarily do the work that it takes to do it. Or some people just don't have the time for it. So that's the thing about localized sounds, is you can't do much with it unless you're willing to set it up. And setting it up is something that will be ongoing. So if you want to add more sounds, you'll have to go through that process again, like put it in the right directory and then link the sounds in Fantasy Grounds. And then from there, you have to link the context or whatever triggers you want to create in Fantasy Grounds. So that's the real stickler here. So one of the things that I've noticed that people are hung up on when it comes to this, adding the audio to your machine is, one, if you open up the sound context menu in Fantasy Grounds on the top right, there's a little like musical notes. And this is just a basic window. This is where a lot of your sounds are going to populate as you add content that is linked in with your links or with the stuff from Syrinscape. So if I click on the settings, this is going to take you to the menu where you import your sounds. So Fantasy Grounds has a native file import system. This is the basic one. There are ways that you can add these via CSV. So that way you don't have to individually do it or have to do it in chunks. You can do it all at once. You can clear these links, and then you have a file import, which is what I'm going to show you shortly. If you have a Syrinscape sub and it's already linked together, then this is something that you're going to have to go through when it comes to setting it up. And we'll talk about that a little bit. This is already pretty well documented. So if you use the Atlassian article that they've just updated, this goes through all that. It tells you how to enable the chat. There is a setting in the options. It's on by default, but there's an option there where you can actually turn this off or on. You can go through this Atlassian, and it'll show you step by step how to do all this stuff. They even covered this local import of the audio that I'm about to show you. So it goes into quite detail about how this is, how you're able to set this up. And it's really, the main thing I see is people are hung up on is they don't know that you have things in the subfolder on the back end of Fantasy Grounds, at least initially. And then the other thing is that you have to copy as path. So if you just right click and copy and then try to paste it in there, it's not going to work. It's actually just going to give you an error in the chat window. So if I come in here to the back end where it says sounds, this is what I'd set up. And you go into this area, well, let's say the subfolder. Okay, so when you copy these actual text here, you can't just Control C and then Control V, Control Copy, Control Paste. So you have to hold the Shift key, and if you have a Mac, you need to hold the Opt key. Oh, there's another key. It's not Shift. But once you do that, you'll get this context menu that says Copy as Path. So you have to do that. If you do just copy, it's not going to work. Copy as Path is what you want to click on. So once you've done that, then you come into this context menu. Now, depending on your setup, like this is a file setup for the regular Fantasy Grounds. The Syrinscape kind of has its own, and that's imported in. When you do this web import, it pulls in all the sounds from the context. And then you have this generate invite and stuff, but we'll go over that. That's the Syrinscape part. But I have an extension that I downloaded recently. This is developed by someone who works inside of Fantasy Grounds. And it's basically a way to incorporate the VLC player with your local audio. So if you don't have a third-party, extension or whatever, or a service, you can kind of wing it with this, but you still have to pipe your audio. That's not going to go away. So this is the VLC player. This is an older one. This is 2.0. So it's not, this whole setup doesn't work on anything but 2.0. So that's one thing I ran across. I didn't read is what it is. So if you go to the page where this is actually offered on Fantasy Grounds, it will tell you what it is you actually need for this. So this is like the example, and there's a video that kind of gives you an idea of how to do it. But right in here it says it's currently only works for VLC 2.0, and it even gives a link where to download it. So I didn't even read that. I just downloaded it and started going for it. So just be careful on that. You do have to have 2.0. So if you have an older version, you might have to remove it. I don't know. I don't know if it'll conflict with the older one or not. But the extension is pretty simple to install, and it gets updated through the updater. And it's nice that it's an actual developer from Smiteworks building it. Kind of just did it for the community. This is actually Cameron that built this. But if you haven't already, check this out. If you want to use local sounds, this is one way to handle it. This still doesn't, take care of the problem of piping it to your players, but this gives you a little bit more control over your local sounds in Fantasy Grounds through the interface. So once you have this thing installed and you've done the extension, then when you go to set up your audios, we're kind of going through right now, local audio. Basically, that's the first steps. And then once you've done that, then we're going to come into, in this case, this will be the VLC player if I'm going to use it for that. The file and the VLC are two separate things. So this is the one that's native to Fantasy Grounds. And as you can see, there's not much to it. You have a play button, that's it. So that's really hard to, that just plays from your whatever your default media player is on your computer. So, and you don't have much control. You don't have volume control or anything in Fantasy Grounds. So that's the difference between these. With Syrinscape, if you have a subscription, you have that all set up. It has volume control, stop. It'll blend audio. It'll fade in and out. Does all that for you. So that's why it's kind of popular, because it kind of takes care of some of that stuff. And you got to remember the quality of your audio that you have also makes a difference. So you might have stuff from one publisher to the next, and they're recorded completely different. And when you try to play those files, the volume levels are different. So the mastering of all the different audio elements might be different. So you have that to keep in mind too. So what I suggest that if you're worried about that, the dynamics and how loud the stuff is and the quality of it, you want to probably buy from one or two vendors. And if you got a big scattered collection from 5 or 6 sources, they're all going to vary. And it's going to be kind of unwieldy if you copy and paste your entire library in here and you don't even know what you have. So it's going to get overwhelming. So my suggestion is, if you're going to use your local audio, to organize it, because just be picky and choosy at which stuff you import. That way you know what you got, and you're not just set with this huge list of files that you're probably not even going to touch. So that's my suggestion, only from a standpoint of that I've done that before, and it makes a big whopping list. Like for instance, this thing here is 6 pages, and I've only added like a few folders. So if you're not careful or you're not picky and choosy, yeah, you're going to have a lot of options, but you're not going to even know what the hell half this stuff is. So unless you've gone through your whole library and figured out what you want, it's really kind of pointless. Some of them are self-explanatory, like, the title itself kind of gives it away. But there are others that are not so descriptive or even make sense. So that's something you're going to have to deal with on a personal level. That's not a Smiteworks thing. That's not a Discord thing. This is a kind of a personal preference thing. So when you get to the routing of the audio, you want to add this. You can either add it to the file or VLC. I'm going to do the VLC one because I don't know if I've added these yet. But when you go to the routing path, this is set up for VLC. This actual address is a local address. Port 8080 is the channel that it's sending the stop and play and those basic commands. So that's what creates this link between Fantasy Grounds and the program that you're trying to route it to, in this case VLC. So whenever someone does that programming, all the basic commands go through that port, and it's a localized port. It's not going online. So this is kind of a somewhat of a solution for creating your own audio links in Fantasy Grounds. So the nice thing about the extension is that you have this control bar. So I think he's going to tidy this up and make a little shortcut thing so you can put it in your taskbar or down here in your shortcuts. But essentially you have volume control, you have stop, and you can loop files with this. So that's what's the difference between using this VLC extension and then using the basic one that comes with Fantasy Grounds. So this one gives you a little bit more control as opposed to this. So it kind of depends on what you need, but if you do it with just files, it's just going to play a one shot and it's going to play all the way through and then it stops. If you want to kind of be able to toggle and change volume and stop and loop files and stuff, you can do it a little bit easier through the interface with the VLC extension. So the file one is very basic. It just plays the file. It doesn't care about the volume or anything else. You have to adjust that manually from your player itself. But this thing here controls the player, in this case the VLC player, which is really handy. So, file import. So I copied and pasted, kind of going and jumping around here, but when I copy and paste this, you have to hit Shift or the Op key, and then you want to hit copy as path. That's where a lot of people are having problems. And then once you do that, you do the file import and you paste it here. One thing I made a mistake. I'm going to let you guys know this because I feel like an idiot, but I was actually copying from my original directory. So I have a directory on my computer that's a D drive, and it has all of my audio on there. And the reason I have it there is because I don't want it on my main drive because it's too much. So I have it stored in a different drive. So when I was in the middle of setting this up, I forgot that I wasn't copying from the Fantasy Grounds subfolder. I was copying from my direct folder. So it actually said D whatever, and I wasn't paying attention to this directory. So I couldn't figure out. I said, I did everything right. What the hell? But then as I was going through it, I was actually doing a live video. I went, oh shit, I didn't even copy the correct directory. So I was in the middle of copying files from my directory to Fantasy Grounds, and then also at the same time trying to import those into Fantasy Grounds from Fantasy Grounds folder. So I still had the wrong path set up, and I pasted it in here, and I couldn't figure out what the hell I was doing wrong. And it was because I didn't have the correct directory. So anyway, so I'm going to hit File Import. It pulls that in. It's hard for you to tell because I've already added a lot of stuff in here. But if you do it wrong, it's going to tell you over here in the chat window. It'll say you have the wrong directory. So it does depend on where you're putting these files. So you have to have it put in a subfolder in Fantasy Grounds and then copy those paths from there. It won't accept any other thing. It's a security thing. So a lot of people are pissed off that we can't play these sounds through Fantasy Grounds directly. So Fantasy Grounds doesn't really have any logic or coding or anything that's going to allow somebody to actually play the file. The file is played through whatever media player you have on your system. It's no different than playing a song or something on your hard drive that an MP3 file. The only difference is that you're trying to control it and trigger it from Fantasy Grounds, and that's where this feature actually helps. So all this other crap I'm showing you doesn't really matter if you can't connect with Discord with your audio, and there's really no good easy way to do it. You have to set these up, and I think that's the challenge and the misconception. Just because you have Syrinscape, right? All these are nicely organized. They're set up. They're linked. They have context. That means like when you bring up an NPC, it's going to load those sounds for you. When you do it this way from your own point of view, from your own library, you have to do all that yourself. And that's a lot of work. And that's what you're paying for if you're going to invest in these packs that Fantasy Grounds has put out. Now, there's not very many, but I know they're working on others, and they will have a way that make it a little easier for stuff that is purchased, like for official content. But you're still going to have to set up homebrew stuff. You're still going to have to set up your own sound links with, your NPCs and your players. So it's going to take some work, especially if you're doing it all old school like this with all your own files. This isn't actually a new thing. If you've used Matakire's links, he already has done a bunch of these just to kind of, there's like thousands of them in his pack. So if you're already using that and you already have everything set up, I don't see why you'd have to change to this, because it doesn't change anything else other than the fact that, it's got a little bit different setup, but it really works the same way. So if you're already using Matakire's sound links, I would just stay with that, to be honest. And if you want to use the local player of Syrinscape, Matacure sound links work with that. This new Syrinscape thing that's built into Fantasy Grounds does not. So this only works with the Supersyrin sub and the, if you want to get the sound packs, and you need to have the online player. So that's the difference between using something like Matacure's solution as opposed to using this built-in integration. This is supposed to make it easier and quicker for people that are newer to the platform or that haven't invested in any audio solutions. This probably doesn't help anyone that's already doing it. So unless you want to completely start over, I don't recommend changing anything. There's no reason for it. It doesn't benefit you at all. As a matter of fact, if you want to avoid a Syrinscape subscription, then you might as well just set it up locally and fight with it and set up all the links and stuff yourself, because that's what you're going to face. There's a lot of people out there pissed off. They think that because of the Syrinscape implementation that they're going to have sound and they can join and send it to their players. That's not really the case. Nothing really has changed. So it's really just the tool itself, the integration gives you the ability to associate audio with events in Fantasy Grounds. That's it. It doesn't do much of anything else other than organize the links and such. So that's what the integration is. It's not about providing you with sounds and how to figure out how to use your computer, essentially. It's more or less, giving you a way to control triggers and effects, or not effects, but sound effects through your own computer or through Syrinscape. And I don't know if any of you were hoping that was the case, but it's not. So, but if you're someone who already uses audio and you're already doing this, I don't think you need to do anything else, to be honest. Unless you want to start all over or start a whole new campaign doing this, there's really not much point in doing it. The real cool thing, though, is the allure of using Syrinscape is, you don't have to do all this stuff. Like, this is all manual work here. And then when you go into a sound context, so for instance, I'm going to bring up an encounter here. This is kind of more on the Syrinscape side of things, but I'm going to bring up a map, and then I have an encounter already linked here. And then I'm going to bring up the combat tracker. And I already have like a couple players on here. So when I add this encounter to this particular map, I have these sharks. So the sharks themselves probably don't have any context, right? Because they're just sharks. So what you might do with something like this is a splash, like a water splash. Like when they come up to the surface and you're fighting with them, you might set up a link to either your own library or to Syrinscape that's going to trigger a splash sound when these sharks are on the combat tracker. So when I hit the down arrow, it will bring up the shark, obviously. And then when you go to the sound context, here are the links that's going to come up. So this actually had a couple links. I can't play this to you guys because I don't have the audio routed to Discord. So I can play it locally, but there's no way that you guys can hear the sounds unless I invite you to the table and I invite you to the link for the audio player for Syrinscape. So
you totally just need to make the sound.
What's that?
You totally just need to make a splash. There you go.
Yeah. But basically, this is the kind of thing that you're getting when you buy Syrinscape and when you're buying those links, because this stuff comes up automatically and it's already associated with the given creature or an attack or whatever it is that you want to trigger. So if I remove the sharks from the combat tracker, so if I go to this menu and hit delete from tracker, and I'm going to delete all the foes, then that context goes away. You don't need it anymore, supposedly. So that's the nice thing about the Fantasy Ground / Syrinscape route, is because you're kind of it's already done for you. A lot of the work is done. You can still do the same thing yourself, but you have to do all the context menu, kind of understand how it works. And it is on the Atlassian guide. So if you go to the sound integration article for using audio, you scroll down towards the bottom, it will tell you like how that works. So this is getting into how it controls it, how to use them. So like for instance, this is the Syrinscape sound packs, assuming you haven't done your own. And these are the context menus, like I was showing you, that when you have Dire Wolf, it's going to pull in that the sounds associated, whether it's done for you or that you've done it yourself. And then you'll be able to trigger those as you need to. So this is where you need to learn to create your sound sets manually. You can either do it with Syrinscape or you can do it with your own local audio. But just remember that the local audio is less control, but you have more freedom of what the content is. With this, you're kind of stuck with Syrinscape's subscription and what they provide, but all of that stuff's set up for you. So you have to make the decision, what's worth my time and if I even like the sounds they have. Because to be all honest with all of you, for myself, I'm going to mostly use local audio, and I'm just going to use a chat trigger to set up an ambient sound that runs in the background. I don't want video game like quality experience, because that's what you could potentially get when you have everything set up as a trigger. Like every time someone uses their sword or magic, there'll be some kind of sound, and that's really cool for like the first 10 minutes. But after about 2 hours of that, I'll tell you what, I don't even want to play anymore, to be honest. It just gets on my nerves. It's like playing an MMO or something. That's why I'm not too keen on incorporating this into my games. Although I do see the value. I like it. I think it's really cool. But it just depends on what your needs are for the table. So I'm just giving you a personal experience example of what types of things you might come across. But you do have to trigger these based off of the type of content. There's trigger or content. So triggers are chat, attack, cast, those sort of things. And then content is story, NPC. So these are links that we can set up ourselves in Fantasy Grounds. So if you go to the right-hand side under library, this is your sound sets. And this is where you can make your own groups. So you can set up a group of sounds for your players, and then you can do like a folder for NPCs, and then you can do a folder for your campaign. And what's nice about this is you can actually export this. So once you've done all this work, you can actually export this as a module and make it like a record that you can load alongside your next adventure, your next session, without having to redo all this. So that's another benefit of having this type of integration, is that you can save your sound links as long as you haven't moved your files and you still have a Syrinscape subscription. It should work between any campaign. But if you've canceled your subscription or you moved or renamed your files that you're using for audio, obviously these sound links are going to break. They're not going to work. So being able to go through every single sound and associate it with every single event is very time consuming. And that's the other thing you're paying for when you buy the sound packs, is you're paying for that convenience. And that's where people don't quite understand that. And then they're like, well, I don't want to do all this shit. This is too much work. And that's exactly why the Syrinscape thing is so appealing, is because it has it done for you. You don't have to do a bunch of it, but you are paying a $10 thing a month. So you kind of have to think, is it worth my cost or time or what? So some people are very stubborn and they're going to do it themselves. And there's no problem with that. I'm kind of one of those people. I want to do my own thing. I don't want necessarily have all those sounds. I want to have the ability to just trigger some background sounds, and that's it. I don't need all those bells, balloons, and whistles. I'm just going to use the sounds that I want to link to a certain area. Like if I'm in a place that I've created that's a story entry, it'll pop that up. So if, for instance, story sounds for like Lost Mine of Fendover, when you're on the Goblin Trail, it's going to play the audio associated with it, and the keyword here is audio is Goblin Trail. So there's that. That's how you would tie it in. So maybe there's a story link that's titled Goblin Trail. As soon as it knows that you're messing with it, then it's going to come up in your context here when you actually pull up the story entry. So if you have the Lost Mine of Fendover module, it's going to change context depending on what you bring up in the story entry. It's not going to do it from sound sets. But if you
I do have
actually...
a question.
Sure.
It goes back a few minutes to what you were talking about, though, with the subscription to Syrinscape.
Yep.
So if you get a Syrinscape subscription and just to try it out, and then you set it all up, will we run into errors later on if we cancel our sub, or is there a way to turn it off?
Yeah, so you're not... Well, you can turn off the audio, period, from the settings. So you can totally turn that off. So you don't even have to worry about it. But when it comes to the context menu, nothing's going to play because you're not connected to Syrinscape anymore.
But it won't error the game out, or
no, it shouldn't. Okay. I don't see why. And like I said, you can turn this off so you won't even have to worry about it. Because you might have half of your library might be your local stuff, and then your other half might also be stuff that you've done through Syrinscape, because you can mix and match. You don't have to use one or the other. You can actually mix and match your own audio with theirs. So you can... It just depends on what you're linking and the context of it. But if you're going to run the adventure in let's say if you're going to run Lost Mine, so I'll bring that up in the library. So here's Lost Mine of Fendover. And then when you go to the story part, you got all these different sections. So here's the, let's see, Goblin Trail. I'll just say here's the first ambush. Okay, so when you bring that up, it automatically brings that up in the sound context because it's basing it off of this text here, the P103 Goblin Ambush. And that's right here on this story entry. So it's pulling from this description here. So if you're going to do your own like this description has to be the same as the context menu. Otherwise, it's not going to trigger.
So you can also step through the reference manual.
Yes.
And as you do that, it will do that. It'll do that as well.
So like this stuff. So it's changing the context menu.
When you have a moment, there's a question about the VLC web interface that you might want to look at.
Okay, go ahead.
The question is, someone's having trouble finding the VLC web interface module routing address. Is that under the FGU or the main computer system?
It's probably its default now. It's actually right on the front page. If you go to the actual place where they offer the extension, it's right there. I mean, most everything you need is right there on the page. So here, it even say it. It's it tells you localhost : 1080/requests. So that is actually right in the description of this particular video and the actual page. So if you read through these things, you'll get most of the information you need. And they actually tell you that sometimes the firewall will block that port. So that's nothing different. That happens with Fantasy Grounds anyways. And then you have to put that in from the VLC player into Fantasy Grounds on the back end of it. Or in this case, under settings, under VLC, there's a route path, and you just put that in here. So that's how that has to go in there. If you change it on your computer for some reason, you have to change it here too. That's what it says in the notes. Some people have an elaborate network system where they have to do a lot of special routing, so that would compensate for that. And then you also have to remember firewalls and security and all that other stuff too. This sets it up as the default path, which is that 80/80 thing. But if you have a very unique set situation where you've got all kinds of stuff going on, you might have to change this address, but it has to match whatever you have in the VLC player. So the VLC player, when you go into the settings in there, there's a place where you can change that if you have to, like if you have a really, advanced networking setup. So that could be, kind of annoying if you're not sure how this stuff works. But this is when you start getting into where you got to route things around a private network and all this other crap. So really, the 1080 path or this 80/80 is the default. So if you haven't changed anything, likely that's what you need. I hope that helps answer the question. I don't know if that's... And just remember that you can only play one sound at a time. So if you're using the VLC player and you try to trigger something and you want something else to play, it's not going to play two versions of it. So in other words, you have one media player, it's only going to be able to play one sound at a time, like a song or music. You don't usually play two songs at a time unless you're mixing them. So there's no way to do that with the VLC player. But if you're using Syrinscape in the background, you might be able to blend your local music with the Syrinscape sound effects. You can do something like that. But it can't play like a town and then another audio clip. You can do that with your own soundboard, like if you have third-party software where you can kind of trigger stuff, and you can do it that way, but it doesn't necessarily integrate with this VLC player. Then you'd have to add that virtual cable and all that other stuff. So the audio routing could be a lot of work. And it really depends on what you're going to use. There's a lot of options out there. One of the ones that I'm looking at doing, since all this audio stuff has come up, this is only one of several, but this Kinku FM, it really gives you an easy way to incorporate audio into a stream or into Discord. So you can set it up to where it takes from your accounts like Tabletop Audio, Spotify, YouTube, and then for your computer, you can see they have a Tabletop Games. They have this Fandelver thing going on. So what this does is it neatly packages all your audio together into one interface. And then from here, you route this into your VLC, or not VLC, but into Discord. Or if you are still using the virtual cable, you would use that and then pipe it into Discord that way with a bot. So it really it allows you to do like audio sharing through website. So you can take an address that is given to Kinku FM, it's generated from your account, and you just share that link, and your players can listen to it as they need to on their computer. And that's kind of how the Syrinscape web player works too. Whenever you share your session with your players, so there's a part where when you are going to set this up for the first time and you're going into Syrinscape, you can invite. So you click generate first, because that's going to create the session, and you want to allow this to be open. I usually say yes to all, so it doesn't keep popping up. That's a security message. So now it says new Syrinscape player session ID was generated. Use the invite players button in the sound settings to share the link. So if I hit invite and hit yes to all, it's sending this to the lobby, and then people can click on that link in your game, and it brings up the web player. So that's kind of how Kinku FM works, but it's doing it manually. You have to generate the link and then drop the link into chat or send a private message to your players, but it works very similarly. But what's nice about that thing is it's everything. You can put Syrinscape and YouTube and everything into it, and then just share one link with your group. This thing does have a cost, but you can literally just put in $1. So this Kinku FM, if you're going to do it, you can actually buy it for $1. I mean, it says buy now. You put in your own price. If you don't put anything in there, it'll take you straight to the download page, so you don't even have to pay for it. So you can do that. Put 0. Then it takes you to the download page. So it even has support for Mac and Linux. So if you're one of the people that like to use those, it has different versions for that. So this might be helpful for people that don't use Windows. So, but there are lots of solutions. But I want to kind of recap what we're talking about here. So kind of go through this main part of this. So the first thing to know is that, you know, the audio is not going to set itself up. Okay, you have to do that yourself, and that takes some practice. It takes some, getting used to the interface. Syrinscape just makes it easier if you're going to go that route. So, like I said, you have this invite link generating the session. The web import it'll take your authorization code from your account on the Syrinscape, and it will pull in all the audio that you own or that you subscribe to. And it makes this list. It just builds this list. It actually goes off a CSV file in the back end. And if you actually open up Fantasy Grounds, you'll be able to see the CSV file because it downloads it to your Fantasy Grounds directory. And then when you need to refresh it, or if you've added something new to your library, let's say you bought a sound set on Syrinscape, you have to do the web import again. And all it does is it re-downloads the CSV file, in which pulls in all the file names, the IDs, the type, all that stuff for this tool to work. So if you've used Matacure's, his method of doing this, it's the same thing. This thing was kind of built on that premise. So if you guys have ever used that, it kind of works the same way. Actually, John, or in this case, we know him as Matacure, he kind of pioneered this along with Gwydion and a couple others. So these guys actually did a lot of the trailblazing for this feature. And then once Smiteworks and Syrinscape got together and they go, well, there's already something we can kind of do. They probably looked at that and said, hey, that's a really good idea. So, this is a case where some of the community content has been rolled into Fantasy Grounds. So it's something that does happen occasionally. There's a lot of people who says, well, there's all these extensions out there that are really useful. How come they're not already part of Fantasy Grounds? Well, they kind of do it based off of different, I don't know what their criteria is, but they'll incorporate things as they can. And this is one example where that kind of happened. I mean, it's not exactly the same thing, but it works similarly. So this context menu thing, I don't know if Matacure's does this, but as far as everything else, it's very similar. And if you're already using that, there's no point in switching to this because it's really almost the same thing. The only difference is that you probably had to set up a lot of your own sound links. And once you understand that process, it's not too bad. It's just very time consuming. That's really what it comes down to. So occasionally when you run an adventure and you don't like the sounds that they give you, you can always bring up something and link it in here. You can drag and drop things into your sound collections that you develop over time. So maybe this story thing here, you might want to add a couple sounds to this that are not part of the original. So you can unlock this, and then you can link all this in, and it's going to be your own stuff that's tied in with the story. So no matter what, you're going to be relegated to having to do something like this. So Syrinscape kind of automates probably about 3/4 of it for you. If you're going to do it locally and do it all yourself, it's a lot of work, but you can do it all. But it really does barely anything, maybe 10%. So it really depends on what your needs are and how you want to attack this. It comes down to cost and time and what your needs are. There's really no good way to say it. I mean, it is what it is. You have to, or don't use it at all. I mean, that's the other thing. So the feature itself is free. They're not charging you for the ability to link things together. What they're charging you for is if you want the convenience of having all the links done for you, that's the sound packs, or having Syrinscape host all the audio and doing all the labeling and all that stuff. And of course, they produce the sounds themselves. So that's kind of what you're paying for with the subscription, or in this case, if you're going to buy the addendum or the add-on modules that go with the adventures, then that's what you're paying for. There is all this stuff. You're paying for all these links. It's not hard. I mean, you can unlock these and drag everything over yourself and kind of make your own. There's I did talk to Doug before I ran this event, and I asked him, if there's anything he needed to put out there, because he's on vacation right now. They're going to do more videos that are going to be more official, but he just reiterated with the things that I've already told you. And one of them is that you don't have to buy any of the sound packs. You can do all this yourself if you want. And that was the only thing I could think of that was different than what I would have said. But everything else that I've told you is true, and it is the reality of it. And it's not an easy thing. It takes a little work to do it yourself. Or
do you know if the sound pack is the same version that's on the Syrinscape site, because they already have a Lost Minds pack?
It links with it. That's what it does.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, so if you have a pack on the website and you have the subscription, you have access to it. And essentially, it's pulling from that. When you download this CSV or the web import, it's pulling all that information. They're all links is what it is.
That's what I thought. Okay, thanks.
Yep. So it is parallel.
To be very specific, the sounds that are on Syrinscape are the sounds. The pack that Fantasy Grounds gives you is links to those sounds.
Yep. And nothing is stopping you from doing it yourself. You can build the whole thing yourself if you want.
Can you duplicate in the Fantasy Grounds, for instance, in Syrinscape? Obviously, you can take the sound set, you can duplicate it and customize it as you want. Can you do the same in Fantasy Grounds?
I think so. I mean, you're just duplicating links, right? So you're asking if you can borrow these things?
I think I know his question. In Fantasy Ground or in Syrinscape, you create a sound set and then add all of your sounds into that.
Right.
In Fantasy Grounds, you're just linking. So it doesn't matter if you have a sound set, you're just creating links to whatever sound sets are there.
Gotcha. Yep. Yeah. My question was, obviously in Syrinscape, you can start from a established sound set and then customize as you want by making a duplicate. That's the reason I was asking.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
Yeah, in Fantasy Grounds, you don't have to do that because you're not making a duplicate. You're just linking to whatever's there, wherever it is.
Makes sense.
Yep. The other thing is, if you're already part of a session, you might have to leave the session. So in the when you're a player and you've joined a campaign, it'll come up where you can actually leave a session so you can join another one. Otherwise, you're going to be linked to the same one. So that can probably going to bite a couple people when they're playing. So let me see if I can find that. There is something in here that explains that. But if you want to get really fancy, you can start with these patterns, or not start with them. You can end up using these. And this is like a way to have these context patterns trigger based off a string of text. And they go in and explain like how all that works, the context menus. You have this percentage sign with this bracket. They go into explaining like there's more advanced linking that you can do. And it's based off the regex from Lewis script thing. So once you understand what these symbols do, it's not a big deal. But initially you're like, what? In most cases, you just need the name of the trigger. But in some cases, you have pattern matching where you want this to encompass a lot of different events at once, not just one link. This is kind of a way to make several links compatible with the sound that you have. So this is how you pull that in if you're going to do it. kind of like in groups, or several files are going to perform these certain sounds. Otherwise, you're going to have to make a link for every little single thing. And that's they have a way to kind of shortcut that, if you want more of a generic trigger that's going to pull from different chat text. But I want to see if I can find that. Okay, that's that. But in here, I read a place where when you join as a player, it will basically, you'll have this thing where you can, this is the GM side, right? But when you're on the player side, or if you're a GM and you're trying to switch to another campaign, you have to leave the first one in here and then you join it with another session. So there's session IDs. So if you're running multiple games, you have to essentially be able to do it that way, and that way you're not stuck on the same group of sounds. You're going to be able to switch between different sessions. You might use the same sound set though in different games, but if it's a completely different game with different sound sets, you're going to have to leave that session and go to a different one, or load up a different one. See, there's an alternative here. This is where you download the remote control links. So when you're in your account in Syrinscape, you can actually download the CSV file and manually import it yourself. Instead of doing the web import, you can import the file. The nice thing about that is you can modify it if you need to. There shouldn't be too many cases where you do, but it might give you a model on how to set up your own for your computer. So if you have a huge list of files and you don't feel like adding them one at a time or a group at a time, if you know how to work with CSV files, you can actually take an entire list of your audio library and put it in there and set it up kind of similarly to like what they do in Syrinscape. Yeah, this goes over, your authorization key. So I'm not going to show you my key. If you go to Syrinscape, and this is one of the first steps, and you go to your account, you have a user dashboard, and that's where you'll get your link. There's a spot where you can grab it, and it will show where exactly your key is, and that's what it pulls in. You have to plug that into Fantasy Grounds before you do anything else. So I know we kind of jumped around a lot. If there's any more questions or confusion or something, let's talk about it. We got about half an hour to go. Anybody got any complaints? Or I'm looking for bitching, man. What's going on here?
Oh, you want bitchy? Let me step in.
Yeah.
I think it kind of got glossed over there, but earlier I was trying to make the point that when you were looking at the story entries and they bring up the sound things, you can also do that with the reference manual.
Yeah, and that's what this is from.
Fantasy Grounds is trying to, like, if you open the reference manual for a Lost Mine of Phandelver, let's say, you can go through it step by step, and each time you go to the next page, it'll bring up the sounds, and it's that's what they're trying to get us to use the reference manuals instead of story entries now anyway, because in some cases they're not even, and I think in every future case they're not going to even do story entries.
Yep. So what he's
saying, as a Fantasy Grounds developer, that I only have to make a reference manual, not a story anymore.
Right. You don't have to do, which they fixed the reference manual now so that you can edit and change the entries in the reference. You couldn't used to do that. So now there really is no reason for story entries, because you can
edit,
add notes, you can add picture, you can literally change anything you want in the reference manual now.
Yep. So this is what example, like you can expand and get rid of this menu. You can actually shrink it now to where it's nothing.
Yeah, it's really cool how they finally got down to doing that.
And I don't know for sure, but they're going to move this button over here. So when you go open this up, you don't have to go into the module anymore. You'll just do it right from the interface. I think they're working on that.
But if you step through the reference manual page by page, it'll change the sound links.
Yep. So what he's saying is this context menu, if you go through, every page changes. So you could do this yourself if you want to take the time to do it. Yeah, it changes as you go. And then you would just launch the sound from there. So that's the cool part of the integration. The uncool part is that you got to do all this work if you want to do it yourself. So there's a lot of links. I don't know how long do you think it would take, Rob, for someone to do that?
So if you go to the description page on the store, they tell you how many. Like I think Player's Handbook has 512, and Monster Manual had 440 or whatever. And then I forget how many Lost Mine of Phandelver had, but in my mind, yeah, it should say right there. If you scroll up, it should say right in the middle there somewhere.
I'm looking at
145.
Yeah.
So how long would it take you to? That's not 145 sound. That's 145 sets.
Yeah.
So maybe there's 1 to 5 or 6 in each one.
Oh Jesus.
Yeah.
So how long would it take you to do that? Not as long as it takes me to pay $4.99. You know what I'm saying? Like
right. I hear you. But it also
per link.
Right, but it also implies the subscription too. So
yeah. So Syrinscape, I think now is, so I bought it years and years and years ago. They charge you 2 months at a time, and I'm paying 20 per. But I think now it's 24. I think they went from $10 and then.
No, it's every 2 months.
Yeah, it's every 2 months, but
so $20.
Yeah, it's $11.99 now. I think so.
Yep.
It's $23.98 every 2 months.
Yeah.
But if you're a DM and you're using sound, like I said, like you said, whether you're using Matakuri's sounds, hashtag, which I prefer, or if you're using if you're doing your own or whatever, it's pretty cool. I mean, if you watch videos of people using these sounds.
Yeah. It just takes a lot of extra work if you're willing to do it. And then on top
you nailed it. You nailed it. It's time versus money.
Time is money, and some people don't have the money, but they do have the time, so then they can just do it themselves.
But some of the weird stuff I've seen in the last week when this came out, and I knew this was coming. I went out and made an article. I was ahead of this because I saw this coming. Like, I already knew that people were going to struggle with that copy as path because I did. I didn't have any idea you had to do that. I kind of went through here and I looked at what John was doing in his in the test area in the lab, and I said, I just put my hand on my head and said, "Oh fuck, this is gonna cause some trouble here," because one, most people don't fiddle around with this stuff, or they don't want to, right? They just want to play. They don't want to goof around with setting all this stuff up. The other is that there's some misconceptions and some assumptions, especially people who are not used to this stuff, is they think that everything's there and when you pay for it, everything works. And it's not quite that cut and dry. Or they didn't know that they needed a Supersyrin escape, or a Supersyrin sub, even though it says it right in the description, but it's not on the front page. That's something I think they should have done here, is they should have put requires Syrinscape, not just Syrinscape. But then again, who knows who reads what, right? So it does say that, and there's people that are mad and they've asked for their money back because they're not getting what they want. So they don't understand that you have to have Syrinscape and all that. And then the people who want to do local audio, they don't understand that you still have to pipe the audio to wherever you're going to, whether it be Teams or Discord or whatever. You have to directly link that sound path to there so that it can be heard by your players. So you can do that with a solution like Kenku FM, which you can create a bot for Discord that'll go into Discord. You could do the old way where you set up a chat or a Discord PTB, which is a public test beta. It's a second account essentially for Discord. You invite it to your session and then you pipe all the audio through that second method. I don't recommend that because it's very clunky and it's very heavy to have two versions of Discord going. and bandwidth. So that's another thing people don't think about is you add this audio element. And if you're already struggling with bandwidth, having problems with people connecting, or you're having problems staying connected, you know, adding all this stuff can potentially add more bandwidth to your overall requirements to play. So there's all kinds of moving pieces to this. And what I was trying to do here is kind of bring that together for you guys so that you understand what exactly you're getting yourselves into and the reality of it. Because everyone looks at this, oh, it's really cool. But then when they actually look into it to see what it takes, they don't want to mess with it, or they don't like the cost, or, you know, they don't want to deal with all the ifs, ands, and buts. But that's the reality of it. And that's why we're doing this class. Because they're going to show you all the cool stuff, like, oh yeah, you could trigger the sound, and you know, you could. That's the, you know, no, I don't think that Smiteworks or any company for that matter is going to say, well, don't buy our packs because it's going to take a lot of setup. You know, they're not going to say that. They're just going to give you what they can, and it's up to you to figure out how to use it. And I'm just trying to tell you there's some reality to it. And, you know, just trying to be honest with you, there's some setup to it. There's some little fiddly things that go along with this. And that's part of the reason this community exists. It's all based on frustration. And I'll tell you what, I already knew that there's going to be a lot of pissed off people, a lot of trolls, and a lot of people that don't understand how it works. And that's kind of why we exist here, this whole community, is because of that stuff. I mean, for an average person that just wants to play, I don't think this is fun. I think it's a lot of frickin' monkeying around with your computer and with Fantasy Grounds and Discord, and, you know, it can be very overwhelming. However, if you already know what you're doing and you're familiar with this type of thing, it's probably not that hard, but it's probably just irritating because you probably already have your own setup and you really don't benefit from most of this. So there's probably no point to even invest in it. You know, it just depends on what your needs are and how you want to go. Some people I've seen or heard are going to wait until they're done with their current campaign and then look into doing something like this, because they've already got all their sounds set up. They got everything already going, so they don't want to mess with that. But if you use this actual Atlassian guide, it tells you pretty much everything I've went over and then some. So if you go down this and handle this thing in steps, it'll be a lot easier for you. So the real issue is you got to kind of do it in compartmentally. So the first thing is getting stuff set up, okay? The second thing is routing your audio and figuring out how you're going to get that to your players, whether you're going to do that through a link or through Discord. And then the last part of it is if you need to customize things or make your own sound sets, then you got to spend the time doing that. So there's kind of three pieces to it. And then the fourth piece is where do you get sounds? So if you're going to do the local audio, I recommend this Monument Studios. I'm not being paid to say this, but they are a really good company. Like they treat you right. They engage with you. They don't overcharge you. They're always having sales. When they send you stuff in the email, it's very direct. It's not total advertising. And I just feel like, you know, I just feel like these guys are actually a good model company for something that is something that people want and use, but are worried about copyright and those sort of things. They have a really good copyright policy in which you can use their stuff, and it doesn't. They basically allow you to use it. So it says, "Are sounds and scores available to use in commercial videos, movies?" Yes. And I built all that into these packs. They're royalty free. All you have to do is not sell the pack to other people, obviously, and maybe mention them somewhere. That's all they ask for. That's very hassle free. So if you're streaming or you're making some content, you're not going to get sued or have that stupid thing that comes up in YouTube. Oh, you're using someone else's music. They actually have a text file they send you where you can actually, it's a license. So if anyone asks you for a license, it's sent to you in the pack that you buy from them. So I kind of promoted them in the in our announcements, because I think this is worth the investment. Most other places, they have stipulations and rules, and you got to do this and stand on one leg and all this other crap. I'm not doing that. I think that this is very hassle-free, and the quality's there. So they have some really good sound sets. Now, there's not going to be for everyone, and they do have some sci-fi. So if you're, that's another thing that's going on with this, is that even Syrinscape doesn't have a ton of sci-fi. I mean, they have some. What do they have? They have cyberpunk. They have a little bit of Cthulhu. They have Starfinder, and they do have some generic sound packs for sci-fi, but not as many as they do fantasy, and that's kind of all across the board. You go to look for things for like Star Trek and Star Wars and Aliens and stuff, not a whole lot of that out there. And that goes all the way down to maps and everything else. So that's not a Fantasy Grounds issue or even your problem. It's kind of just the industry itself. They're kind of they were catering to the fantasy, D&D, Pathfinder stuff, and not so much all the other stuff. So if you have any recommendations for me, this is the one. They send you WAV files, MP3s. And what's nice is they'll send you a pack, or you get the pack, you download it, and then like 6 months later, you'll get more stuff added to it. So it's not like they just give it to you and walk away. You actually get more stuff. So they'll add on a few add-ons as 1 or 2 as they go on. So you'll get an email, it links to you. So anyways, that's enough advertising for them, but you get the idea of, you got some setup to do, you got a little bit of considerations to consider, and you have options. You don't have to use Syrinscape, but just remember it is going to take some work, and you'll realize that as you go through and start doing it. So it just takes a little bit of patience, and I would honestly refer to this updated. This is really well done. The one that was up here before was dated, but if you go through this and actually follow through, it works pretty good. The only complaint that I can say on here is that the order is kind of out of order. And I can actually send Smiteworks, or in this case, Derek, a message and ask him to reorder it, because I think it's kind of like this presentation I just did. It's kind of all over the place. It doesn't go in a linear path. So that's where this might be confusing, because you got to set up the account part of it. You got to set up the audio routing. Then you have to pipe your audio or figure out how you're going to invite your friends to links. And then you got to set up your sound links with your events if you want to make your own. So there's kind of like 3 parts to this. And if you do it in 3 groups like that, you just get it working first, then get where your players can hear it and all that stuff, and then you get it the customization or doing your own thing. And that's kind of the steps I recommend if you're going to do this. Because if you're not going to do it in one day, I'll tell you that right now. It took me all week to kind of get all this information together. And then I was also writing this blog article, which kind of ties all this stuff together. This isn't very helpful in regards to setup, but it has links to all of the Atlassian guide that we were looking at, the initial release video that Doug put out, some of the examples that we've used to show how the stuff goes together. I mean, actually setting it up. And then it talks about the things that most people assume, which is, that everything's there and it's going to work when you do it. And then the other thing is to mention that, Rob and Matacure and Gwydion and people like that have already done, 70% of the legwork on how this stuff works. So if you look at some of their older content and their videos, it's actually almost a complete same thing. So that's why I gave them this little shout out here, because they actually, for the last 3 or 4 years, they've been kind of pioneering this whole thing. So Smiteworks just kind of took the finished product and put it on their software. So a lot of this integration comes from the community that had already tested did all the work on this. So they did get some cooperation from Syrinscape, because obviously Syrinscape wants to sell stuff, right? And they want subscriptions. So they worked pretty nicely with everyone in the beginning. And we actually had them here last year for Founders Day, and they were really helpful and really nice. So I have no problem supporting Syrinscape, because the owner, even though he's looking for subscriptions, he's still a person, and he's still impressionable, and he still interacts with the community. He's not like one of those corporate types so much. I hope that doesn't change, because so far I like their product. I think it's really good. But for myself, I will use some local triggered sound that I purchased from places like from Monument Studios and those things, because I put a lot of money into those, and I kind of want to use them. So they are good sounds, and I think I have an idea of how I want to implement them. And if I want to mix it with the Syrinscape stuff, I can. There's nothing stopping me from that. So, any other questions? I don't want to take any more of your time. It's been a good solid hour.